open your Bibles, please, for the reading of the Scriptures. We'll read the entire chapter of Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19. Thank you for being with us this morning. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy.
Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God.
Do not turn to idols, or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal. I am the Lord your God. When you offer a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord, you shall offer it so that you may be accepted. It shall be eaten the same day you offer it, or on the day after, and anything left over until the third day shall be burned up with fire. If it is eaten at all on the third day, it is tainted. It will not be accepted, and everyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity, because he has profaned what is holy to the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from his people.
When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God.
You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. You shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord.
You shall not cheat your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of him who is hired shall not remain with you all night until morning. You shall not curse to death, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but shall fear your God. I am the Lord.
You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor, or defer to the great, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the wife of your neighbor. I am the Lord.
You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord.
You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material.
If a man lies sexually with a woman who is a slave assigned to another man, and not yet ransomed or given her freedom, a distinction shall be made. They shall not be put to death, because she was not free. But he shall bring his compensation to the Lord, to the entrance of the tent of meeting, a ram for a guilt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering before the Lord for his sin that he has committed. And he shall be forgiven for the sin that he has committed.
When you come into the land and plant any kind of tree for food, then you shall regard its fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden to you. It must not be eaten. And in the 4th year all its fruit shall be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord. But in the 5th year you may eat of its fruit to increase its yield for you. I am the Lord your God. You shall not eat any flesh with the blood in it. You shall not interpret omens or tell fortunes. You shall not round off the hair of your temples or mar the edges of your beard. You shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord.
Do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute, lest the land fall into prostitution and the land become full of depravity.
You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God.
You shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man, and you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. When
when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God.
You shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and honest hin. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.
And you shall observe all my statutes and all my rules, and do them. I am the Lord. An impossible task. There is no hope in the law. May God give us eyes to see and ears to hear the truth of his word as it points to Jesus Christ. This morning we're going to consider the holiness of God as it was to have been demonstrated in the life of Israel. Holiness is often measured on a sliding scale of sinfulness, but this is not helpful. Better is that holiness is a setting aside for God's use. Holiness is binary, either set aside for God or common. Utensils in the tabernacle were holy, not because the dish didn't run away with the spoon, but because utensils were set apart for God's use. The dirt surrounding the burning bush was not holy because it was holy, but not because the dirt was clean, but because God was manifesting his presence there. Israel too is holy, set apart for God's use, even though they objected and rebelled. Because God is holy and set apart, the manner of Israel's life was to be measured and set apart so that they would be different from the nations that surrounded them. This manner of life was memorialized in the Ten Commandments, first spoken to God, to Israel, and then later, about 10 months later, by Moses, as we just read in Leviticus 19. Next week, Tom Shotlick will speak on Jesus' expansion of the law in the Sermon of the Mount. George Burns advised preachers, a good sermon, he said, has a good beginning and a good ending, and then have the two as close together as possible. The length of our attention span, approximately 7 minutes by some measures, will not hold to the middle. The middle of a sermon is often forgotten by us. Not so, however, for Israelites who lived in the ancient Near East. Ancient authors did not put filler in the middle. They packed the middle with key messages. Old Testament writers frequently did this by using a structural pattern. There we go. Known as a chiastic structure, whereby themes marched in order to a central message, then marched back in reverse order. We'll see this chiastic pattern 3 times this morning. The placement of God's commands in Leviticus affirms their importance to Israel. Leviticus stands in the climactic center and functions as a theological heart. It is one of the books of least interest to us, but it was of primary interest to Jews living in the ancient Near East. Leviticus governed their worship. It answered such questions as, what sacrifices do I bring? When do I bring them? Why? Under what circumstances? Am I even allowed to go to the tabernacle? It answered the age-old question, hey Mom, what's for dinner? The dietary law is in the book of Leviticus. In some respects, we can consider that Genesis functions as the epilogue in Deuteronomy. The prologue in Deuteronomy is the epilogue of the Pentateuch. I'll not detail that this morning. Exodus begins with a journey of Israel out of Egypt, and ends with the setting up of the tabernacle at Mount Sinai. Numbers continues with the dismantling of the tabernacle and the beginning of another wilderness journey to the promised land. The short book of Leviticus stands at the mathematical center between Exodus and Numbers. Leviticus covers a mere 1 month period. The subject of Leviticus, tabernacle service, has pride of place. Holiness, however, extended well beyond tabernacle service. It permeated every aspect of Israel's life. Leviticus continues the structural pattern. Inverted themes of sanctuary, priestly, and personal laws focus our attention on the central theme, the Day of Atonement. In the first part of Leviticus, God is approached with blood to achieve atonement. The Day of Atonement is a day of judgment, of cleansing. God is reconciled to his people. The focus turns. Following atonement, the people are instructed to commune with God in holiness. Atonement is the remedy of sin. The goal of atonement is holy communion with God. Instructions for the Day of Atonement in chapter 16 were given to Moses the same day Aaron's son entered the holy place without authorization in chapter 10. Aaron's son desecrated the holy place by entering and offering unauthorized incense. Their corpses made the holy place and the whole tabernacle unclean. The tabernacle needed to be cleansed. We see this pattern of inverted themes again in the central chapter of Leviticus. Chapter 16 begins and ends. Is it up there? Chapter 16 begins and ends with God governing access to the holy place, first restricting access and then mandating access annually on the Day of Atonement. The structure of inverted themes continues as we follow Aaron's movements. Aaron first changes from his garments of glory and beauty into his simple white linen garments, where he begins to offer sin offerings on behalf of himself and the priesthood. That's the bull, and then the people, a goat. After purification, in verse 19, the text explicitly states that the holy place, the tabernacle, and the altar were atoned for, but there is no mention of the people. It is at the thematic center, verses 20 to 22, that the sins of the people are removed when the live goat is led into the wilderness. Aaron then changes back into glorious and beautiful garments and offers burnt offerings of dedication that signify the completion of atonement of the people and their restored communion with God. Jews who first read the Pentateuch and those who read it for over 1,000 years thereafter understood its broad movement to be toward tabernacle service, the Day of Atonement, the removal of Israel's sins, and holy communion with God. After giving instructions for the Day of Atonement, Moses gave instructions for walking and communing with him in holiness. The remaining chapters of Exodus or Leviticus are referred to broadly as the Holiness Code, more narrowly chapters 18 to 20. In these chapters we find the command, "You shall be holy." In making a provision for sin, God also made a provision for holy communion with him. God made a provision for sin in order that he would have his people would commune with him in holiness. We will now at chapter 19 to consider how the Day of Atonement was the gateway to relationship to the Lord, to family, to business, to community, and to justice.
Good morning. I'm going to speak about the verses in Leviticus 19 that have to do with holiness in our relationship to God. In our relationship with God, we must uphold in our hearts the distinction between Him and us. When we read in Leviticus 19, verse 2, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy," we understand how God is set apart from all things by His holiness. The word holy has been described as set apart or separate. In a commentary by David Guzik, he writes about this verse, saying, quote, "God is different than man, and from all others, different in his being, and different in the greatness and majesty of his attributes. He has a righteousness unlike any other, a justice unlike any other, a purity unlike any other, and love, grace, and mercy unlike any other." Unquote. David Guzik goes on to say, quote, "God is not merely a superman. His being and character are divine, not human. The divine is a different order of being than the human." End quote. Mankind has been created in the image of God. Because we are created in His image, we can follow His commands and be holy like Him. Within the context of these verses in Leviticus, Israel was commanded to be different, to be set apart from the nations and peoples around them. Verses 4 and 5 read, "Do not turn to idols, nor make for yourselves molded gods. I am the Lord your God. And if you offer a sacrifice of a peace offering to the Lord, you shall offer it of your own free will." Here the Lord is establishing a contrast. Verse 4 is a command. Verse 5 is an exhortation. In verse 4, the Lord is commanding Israel to depart from idolatry, just as we are commanded to depart from idolatry in our hearts. The word idols in verse 4 comes from a root word meaning worthless, weak, and powerless. In contrast, verse 5 exhorts a man to bring an offering to the Lord of his own free will. Instead of turning to idols, we bring an offering of thanksgiving to the Lord. Holiness is not an obligation, but we be it. We become it of our own free will, and we enjoy fellowship and peace with the Lord. Finally, in verse 30, we read, "You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord." The command to keep the Sabbath and reverence His sanctuary is a reminder that our time is not our own. It belongs to the Lord. In holiness, our time is set apart for the Lord. Time, life, and work, the days of our lives, they belong to the Lord. Let us commit to live them for Him, and so to live in holiness. In Leviticus chapter 19, God's law is applied to different various parts of our life. And in this segment this morning, our message is going to be about holiness in the family, and how appropriate that today is Father's Day, and that we'll be focusing in on the family. So our key verse is verse 3. "Every one of you shall revere his mother and father, and shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God." Now, many people look at chapters like this and they think, well, God just wants to put restrictions on us. He wants us to just comply to His rules. But God has a more specific purpose in mind, more than just imposing rules. God has always wanted His people to have a unique identity separate from the rest of the world. God said in verse 2, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." It's not so much that we're to be holy for our own sakes, but we're to be holy for His sake, because we're identified as His children. In Joel Leininger's message last week, we were reminded of how jealous,
how protective God is of his name. God expects his people to take his name and his holiness seriously. The phrase, "I am the Lord your God," is repeated over 40 times in Leviticus chapters 18 through 26 to remind us that we belong to him. God, in his infinite wisdom and design, has woven holiness into every aspect of life as we know it. His holiness is demonstrated throughout all of his creation, whether it be in nature, in science, and even in mankind himself. Psalm 97, verse 6 says, "The heavens proclaim his righteousness. All the peoples see his glory." Pictures of holiness reveal themselves in marriage, the sanctity of the husband and the wife relationship. One man for one woman is a clear illustration of the relationship between God and his people. For example, in Exodus chapter 20, we find the very first commandment, "I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me." Honoring your father and your mother is also a clear testimony to the order that God has put into the family. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 21 through 33 demonstrate this, being subject to one another out of reverence for Christ, husbands to wives and wives to husbands. Christ is the head of the church, and the church is subject to Christ. Now, Father's Day is a wonderful time to reflect on the vital role that fathers play in the spiritual development of their families and their communities. For all of us who are fathers, I invite you to take seriously the role that God has given us in being both husbands and fathers. While providing for and protecting loved ones are crucial aspects of fatherhood, being a spiritual leader is an equally important and albeit sometimes overlooked responsibility. Fathers are called to guide their children towards a lifelong relationship with God, to cultivate strong spiritual habits, to build solid biblical backgrounds and foundations. Things like prayer and Bible study, worship, fellowship with other believers, servanthood are all key elements that need to be practiced and taught. And when fathers embrace their role as spiritual leaders, the effect just ripples downward. Children raised in spiritually rich environments are more likely to grow up into adults who value their faith and pass it on to future generations. Communities with strong, spiritually led families are often more cohesive and supportive. For all believers, the challenge for holiness in the family can be found in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy."
Holiness in business. Holiness in my business starts with my holiness as a person. Holiness in business has to do with putting God at the head of your business. This is a surrender of your position and authority. By definition, holiness is setting apart of something for God's use. When you set apart or make holy your business, you are saying that I want God to utilize me in this position for his honor and his glory. So how do I achieve holiness in business? From the verses we read from Leviticus 19, we see concepts and attributes that make our business holy. Attributes such as honesty, trustworthiness, fairness, and justice. All attributes that describe God. We need to imitate God at work. This morning, I'd like to talk to you about 3 types of people we find in verses 13 and 14 that we will encounter in business. First, we have our neighbor. Who is our neighbor? For today, I want to consider it, who is our business neighbor? Our business neighbor is one we have direct contact with and influence over. That would be your coworker, the one you sit next to, the person you share lunch with,
someone you see a lot at work. Verse 13, according to verse 13, we are not to cheat nor rob our neighbor. We have knowledge about them that other people may not know. We know how they feel about their job or their supervisors. God commands that we don't use this knowledge against our business neighbor. Remember, we want our co-workers to ask about the difference in our lives. Always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. Next, in verse 13, we have the hired labor, employees. We take on the role of the supervisor or the employer with the higher level of responsibility. Laborers work for the day, and at the end of the day, they get paid their wages so they can take care of their families. It's in our best interest as the employer to deal with them fairly and honestly. We shouldn't abuse our position. God has put us in this position. Use it for his honor and his glory. Finally, in verse 14, we have the deaf person and the blind person. We often think of these people with physical limitations. I own a house, and when my water line broke in my front yard, I was deaf and blind on how to fix it. I called the plumber, praying that he would be fair and not take advantage of me. I was very vulnerable. I'm also a CPA, working primarily as a tax accountant. I have a lot of clients who come to me deaf and blind as it pertains to the Internal Revenue Code. They are very much in need of expert guidance, and that makes them very vulnerable. We have a huge responsibility towards those people, which gives us a great opportunity to honor God. We are not to curse or defame the deaf, and we do not put obstacles in the way of the blind. In 1 Corinthians we read, "But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. On the contrary, we are the ones to defend the deaf and remove stumbling blocks out of the way of the blind. We are to be advocates for those vulnerable people." In verse 14, we read, "Fear your God, I am the Lord." I go back to the beginning, where if we are right with God in our personal life, then we will see the fruits of this in our business life. Holy thinking leads to holy actions. Be a blessing in your business. Remember, being holy in mind and heart for God will ensure we imitate God towards our co-workers, our supervisors, our employees, and our clients.
I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. Those are the words of Jesus in Matthew 25:35. Jesus didn't say, "I looked impressive, so you ushered me in." He didn't say, "I spoke the lingo, so you knew I belonged here." He said, "I was a stranger, and you welcomed me." David just referenced a question, who is my business neighbor? In the book of Luke, Jesus was tested with that question, who is my neighbor? In response to the command, you should love your neighbor as yourself. In Leviticus 19:34, God is telling us to love the stranger as ourself. So it begs a similar question, who is the stranger? Are we talking about immigrants? Sure. I have one at home. She's right back there. My wife, Diane, as many of you know, she's originally from Venezuela. Her parents held dual citizenship, so she went to college here at Towson University. She went to grad school at Hopkins. She got her citizenship, got married, had kids, built a life here, basically. Deanna no longer talks about it, but I know she still feels like a stranger here, even after being in Maryland for 20 years. My family has been in Maryland since the 1600s, 100 years before we kicked out the British. That's a crazy thought. This is my state, so I shouldn't feel like a stranger. Strangerhood is not that simple. Addiction creates its own kind of strangerhood. I struggled with substance abuse for years. and it can leave a sense of being on the outside, of being marked, of not knowing where to fit. I empathize with people who experience that brand of strangerhood. And to be honest, one of the main reasons I work in addiction ministry now is because I feel a little less alone when I spend time with people who struggle with the same thing. But I'm not special in this regard. Everyone here can remember what it feels like to walk into a room and feel like the only one who doesn't know where to stand or where to sit. But for whatever reason, no matter what's happened to you in the past, you can be with friends and family, people who truly love you and think, yeah, but I'll never truly be one of them. That's why these verses matter. A stranger is not only someone from another country. A stranger is anyone who does not yet feel at home. And a holy community is revealed by what it does with people like that. Not by how loudly it talks about love, but by what happens when the outsider walks in. Can the stranger breathe here, or does he brace himself? Leviticus 19:34 contains a reminder to God's people. You were strangers too. In other words, let's not become forgetful in our comfort or arrogant in our belonging. And a word of advice in my experience, the stranger typically doesn't want or need a spotlight. The person who already feels exposed may not need loud attention. Often the truest form of welcome is quieter than that, sincere, thoughtful, and free of spectacle. Holiness in community is not vague, and I struggle with that. It's easy to be holy in private. No one interrupts me there, no one bothers me there, no one wounds my pride there. But what we're talking about here is the character of God taking shape in the way we receive people. The book of Hebrews contains a warning. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. We don't know always who stands before us. And that is part of what makes hospitality so holy. The stranger may be more than he or she appears. And the way we receive them may reveal more about us than we realize. So perhaps the question is not whether we think of ourselves as a welcoming people. The question is whether the stranger among us can honestly say, I was a stranger and you welcomed me.
After a 9-day-long trial, the verdict rested with the jury. The Boston Massacre was in March of 1770. 8 British soldiers were put on trial for the deaths of 5 civilians. John Adams, who was to be a future president of the United States, was the only lawyer willing to represent these 8 British soldiers during a time when hatred for the British was exploding before, as Justin called it, we kicked out the British. Justice can be very difficult when it seems like the whole world is against you. These 8 men had their lives in the hands of John Adams, and Adams desired to see a fair trial. In Adams's closing argument, he petitioned the jurors to review the evidence, adding, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence." In essence, Adams was appealing to the jury to be impartial. Regardless of the 8 men's occupation, their affiliation, the situation in life, he wanted a fair trial. Over 3,000 years before John Adams stood before that jury, Moses wrote, "You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty." You see, the laws of economics are going to create a divide between the rich and the poor in Israel just as it is today. But when it came to justice, Israel was called to ensure everyone was treated fairly. In today's vernacular, we would call this concept equal justice under law. something the founding fathers of America sought to establish through the laws that they created. And standing before that jury, Adams proclaimed that the law punishes evil in all, whether it's rich or poor or high or low, and that they must remain deaf as an adder to the clamors of the populace. As you read the Bible, take note of how often the Lord is calling out injustice among the people. In Amos, he calls for justice to run down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. And how about Jesus? What did Jesus say about the law? Well, you see, the people got a lot of things right in the law. They got tithing down. But Jesus said that the people neglected the weightier matters of the law: justice and mercy and faith. This morning, we're talking about the weightier matters of the law. And what was the first of the weightier matters of the law that Jesus pointed to? Justice. How much more should we pay attention to justice in our own lives as we pursue holiness? Granted, we don't have a tremendous amount of opportunities, but, next time I get that notice in the mail for jury duty, I'm going to consider it an opportunity to exercise holiness.
We have just seen how holiness impacted the daily life of Israel following the Day of Atonement. In conclusion, let us consider the necessity of us living holy lives as we view the sacrifice of Christ through the lens of the Day of Atonement. How do we understand New Testament commands urging us to live holy lives? We know that the death of Christ has already made us holy, but as the men considered at breakfast yesterday morning, holiness is declarative. Holiness is not performative. But how should our lives reflect our holy calling? As we are temples of the living God, how do we bring holiness to completion in the fear of God, as we read in 2 Corinthians 7:1? This is deadly. Peter posits the well-known question in his second epistle: what sort of people ought you to be? Two Greek words are translated must. The first imposes a duty or social obligation. The other expresses necessity or inevitability. If our attention is focused on how we ought to live holy lives, our attention is misdirected. The Holy Spirit does not use the must of obligation. He uses the must of necessity. Peter is telling us how we must live holy lives. We cannot live holy lives out of a sense of obligation. Holiness is not moralism. Children of the devil so frequently mimic the good behavior we associate with holy living that they do not see their need to be rescued from the wrath of God. Satan's children can have better marriages, become more valued employees, act more neighborly, fulfill their civic duties more cheerfully. They may look and act better than some of God's children. On Judgment Day, many of them will say, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy or preach in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not do many mighty works that pointed people to Christ in your name?" But as the book of Proverbs tells us, even the plowing of the wicked is sin. The plow of the wicked is not set apart, it is common. If we associate morality with holiness, then we have profaned the holiness of God. We have equated that which is common with that that which is other. Peter tells us how we must live holy lives. Look for the verbs as he continues to write. Waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God. We are waiting for a new heaven and a new earth. Since you are waiting, be diligent. Make every effort to be found by him without spot or blemish and at peace. Peter describes living a holy life by waiting for the coming of the Lord. There will be many people in hell who live better lives than we will, but there will not be one person in hell who looked for the appearance of Jesus Christ as he is revealed in the Scriptures. Not one. You do look eagerly. Your new heart beats faster as you anticipate seeing Jesus Christ face to face. Indeed, the crown of righteousness is laid up for you who love his appearing. Don't miss how this text ends. You will be found without blame, without spot or blemish, because that is just how the Scriptures portray Jesus Christ. You will be as he is. The Scriptures do not badger you because you do not live as you ought to live. Rather, the Scriptures are offering you a life of peace. Be at peace, Peter concludes, by living a holy life, looking for Jesus Christ. So then, persevere in your pursuit of him. Father, as you have placed your son Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to have holy communion with you, and as you have placed your son Israel in the promised land to have holy communion with you, so you are gathering all things to yourself to place your sons, your holy people, in new heavens and the new earth, that final holy place, so that we might be in holy communion with you forever. May the anticipation of being in your presence stir our hearts to live in holy communion with you now, as we walk by faith in our present wilderness experience. Even so, come Lord Jesus. Amen.